Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about how to turn a FASTQ file into an ASV table using the Galaxy software. Okay, so first you needed to have downloaded the zip file in the module page. So all you need to do is download it, put it somewhere you know where to find it, and then double click. That'll go ahead and unzip the file. Let's see what we have inside. All right, so what we have inside is a bunch of FASTQ files, right? And what do those look like again? Let's take a look. All right, remember that they have identifiers, the sequence, as well as a quality score associated with each of those bases. And so all of these files, all these sequences have been already trimmed in terms of the adapter primer barcode sequence and demultiplexed because all of the sequences associated with one sample are already in their respective folders. Each folder here is going to be the forward and then reverse for one sample each here. They should have the same name except for this R1, which is the forward read, the R2, which is the reverse. And so these are called paired end reads. And that's really beneficial because then we get that the ability to double check that our reads are very accurate. All right, so now that we know where our FASTQ files are, all we need to do is go into the Galaxy soft. So now that we know where our sequences are, and all we need to do is go into the Galaxy software, and it'll look like this. Galaxy is an analysis software where a lot of things that you would do with coding, you can just do here with an actual interface. And I've already gone ahead and registered, but what you'll do is you'll register, make a new account, you'll have to verify your email, and then I'm just going to log in here. And what you'll see is a couple things on the left. We have places to upload, we have places to use tools individually if we want. For example, these are a couple of the tools that we'll use. However, we're going to be using them mostly through a workflow. And so you can find a bunch of public workflows, which means people have already pieced together the bioinformatics steps, and all you would need to do is press play in a way. Um, However, you still need to be really active and critical about the different parameters that they're using. And so we're going to play around with them. That's the whole point here. So the main workflow that we're interested in is the DADA2 analysis pipeline. And we're going to do the most recent version here. We go ahead and import it. I already have done that. And then we'll press play. Just so you can get a look to see how the workflows are designed. They basically have a few steps here that will be responsible for adjusting. However, each of these steps, most of them are adjustable. And so what we're going to be doing is importing our FASTQ files and making sure that the software recognizes their paired reads and defining then the length of the sequence that we want to keep and how much we want to trim for both the forward and then the reverse, and if we want to pool samples. That'll go ahead and start the workflow where it'll analyze the quality profile, it'll trim and then reanalyze the quality profile so we can see what it looks like before and after. It'll then go ahead and try to analyze and learn the error rates between the forward and then the reverse. And then it'll apply the algorithms to identify those ASVs using this data step. And then it'll recombine, it'll remerge those paired reads, the forward and the reverse will be combined, and then output a sequence table, that ASV table. It'll make sure to remove any of the chimeras. That'll be that step. And so we'll get sequence counts, we'll get the ASVs, and then also a taxonomic alignment. So the main two things that we'll get as our final product at the end are going to be an ASV table and then also taxonomic alignment, so a taxa table. So we know which ASVs correspond to which taxas. Okay, so this is what it looks like when we want to run something. However, we need to first upload. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a local file. I'll choose all of the FASTQ files that we have, and they'll all show up. One thing that you can do also here, um, this is kind of a file format that it's easier to work with. So we'll make all of them this FASTQ Singer file type, and then press start. So these files are going to keep on downloading or uploading, and they'll show up in this history. So we can rename this history. So this will be um, module or tutorial. That'll be kind of the history for the project that we're doing right now. And once all these files are in, we're going to select them and then create a folder so that we don't have to keep working with each of the files individually like this. Okay, all my files are finally done downloading. And if we take a look at them, they should look pretty similar to what we had before in our text file. Okay, and then like I said, we're going to go select all of them and then create an advanced built list, which will allow us to pair these files. It'll ask, how do you want to pair them? How do we identify the forward and the reverse? And so here it's just going to be with like an R1. This is automatically there, and that's perfect because that's what our file looks like. It already can tell. And you should have all these check marks identifying the forward and the reverse reads. We can go ahead and name them. And now they're all nicely inside of here with the forward and the reverse already labeled. Now we're ready to use our workflow. And it's already selected the collection that we've created with the forward and the reverse. However, it's asking us here to provide the forward and reverse truncation. And so how much we want to trim with the forward and the reverse. We actually can't tell yet because we need to first manually perform the quality profile. So we'll leave this one alone. We will identify paired reads. And then here we're going to unaggregate the data because we want to take a look at each of the samples individually. We're going to make a decision based off of the aggregate data, but it's nice to get that resolution to see how each of the samples look in terms of quality. The sample number will choose like the total number of reads that it'll look through to create that quality figure. I think this is more than we have to work with right now, so it's going to go through each of our reads. And then we can go ahead and run. While that's still running, we can actually take a look at this has already been fully run, and so we can take a look at what the quality scores looks like when they're aggregated. So here, when you want to look at the output of a step, all you need to do is press this view button and it'll present this in a PDF. So here are the files aggregated in terms of the forward reads. And so we really don't see a decline up until around 240, right? And so that quality score is staying pretty high up until the end, which is expected. And so maybe we want to trim to 240 here for the forward. if we were to take a look at the reverse, it'll look quite different. Remember that for Illumina sequences, it will analyze or it will sequence the reverse read after the forward read. So at this point, things have already started to degrade and the sequencing quality is starting to decrease all over. But here we can take a look and see what that point is where it starts to drop. It looks like it's about 160. So that's probably where we want to cut off. However, remember that we want to make sure there's enough overlap between our forward and our reverse reads so that we can merge them later. So that overlap needs to be around at least 30, ideally more than that, like 50 to 100. So if we have our reverse at 160, our forward at 240, so we can add those together, we'll get 400. And then originally, one of the full amplicons would have been 250. So each of the reads are 250 at their total amount. All we need to do is 400 minus 250. That'll give us a 150 overlap. That's perfectly enough, right? All right, going back to our active run here, we can see each of our samples individually. They all look a little bit different, but they all start to decline around that 240 base pair mark. This is the reverse, and so it's going to be substantially worse, right? That's going to be around 160 for pretty much all of them. So that's what we're going to use to base our decision in our workflow. We have our collection selected. Perfect. And for the forward read, we're going to do 240. For the reverse, we're going to do 160. And so one thing to keep in mind is we can trim more if we wanted. However, we have to think about if it will be helpful or harmful. Um, I think in our case, if we wanted to trim more, the quality wouldn't really be more preserved. Um, and we could potentially mess up with overlap and alignment. This, in the end, will result in potentially less ASVs being recognized and less depth in our analysis because many reads might have to be thrown away if they can't merge properly. We're gonna choose to pool samples here because this might help identify more ASVs down the line. There are really complex algorithms that decide what deserves to be an ASV, one of which takes into account very rare sequences because ASVs, as we know, will take every sequence variant. So any sequence that looks a little bit different and try to see if that belongs to a really unique, like a unique taxa, or if it's potentially erroneous and should be thrown away. And so what pooling does is that it allows us to make sure that the frequency of these, let's say, rarer sequences is being recognized across all the samples. And if there's maybe a couple samples or a couple sequences in one sample and then a couple in another and then a couple in another, it might identify that as an ASV as opposed to if it just analyzed every sample individually and there's only like one or two of this specific sequence, it might think that that was just a mistake to be there and then never identify that as an ASV, if that makes sense. So that's why pooling may increase sensitivity. We'll go ahead and do that. And then we need to choose the reference database. This is the Silva database, which is very widely used. We'll use here the most updated version. So then all we need to do after selecting a reference database is run work through. And then we will see the progression of this workflow in real time. And then we can always also keep updating our history here. So what we're going to see here on the right are the uploads that we have, as well as all the outputs within each of the steps. So let's go through them again. We have our quality profile, which we took a look at. It's going to also redo this because it's just an integral part of the workflow. It'll go ahead and then also trim according to what we identified, as well as filter. Okay, so we've made a little bit of progress here, but I wanted to show you one thing as well as that's um, going on in the background. If we go to workflows, we can actually adjust and edit the workflow that we have so we can look at the various parameters and tailor them to our needs. Okay, so we'll take a look here and actually go ahead and edit. And one specific step here I want to really draw your attention to is the filter and trim. So it'll take the trimming step, the truncation that we defined, um, but there's so much more to that that we could actually also adjust. Um, I'll show you what's most important here. So here we can leave this alone, but basically it's truncating reads at a quality threshold. So once it reaches a base with a quality score of 2, it will just truncate the rest of the read. In this case, this will preserve quality. And then we can trim starting from the left side or the right side, depending on our needs. So in our case, our sequences have already been trimmed from the left side, including the adapter sequences and the barcoding sequences and the primer sequences. So that's all good. And then if we take a look here, remove reads by expected errors. Okay, so that's also referred to as max EE. And basically, what this allows us to do is really quality filter well. And so what this number 2 means is that only 2 errors or expected errors, given this calculation here with Q-score, um, only 2 expected errors per sequence will be allowed, and anything more than that, and the sequence will be discarded. Anything less than that, and it'll also keep it. So we can adjust this if we want only really high quality sequences, very accurate sequences to be going through. We can change that to 1 or maybe even 0. However, think about what our output will be from that, right? So the more stringent that we are, the more strict that we are with our quality thresholds, then the less sequences and reads are going to go through our workflow, right? However, if we're not ending up with any reads, we can consider, and quality isn't as high of a priority for whatever type of analysis we want to run, then we can make that a little looser, for example. As you saw, like in the reverse sequences of the paired end reads, the reverse ones are much lower quality, especially toward the end. And so sometimes you could be a little bit less stringent on the reverse reads, but we're going to stick to 2 for both the forward and the reverse. Okay, so keep those in mind when you're running your own analysis for your assignment. Okay, so that took a very short amount of time. When I ran it earlier, it took a couple hours. So I guess it really depends how long it takes. It might take a really long time. So just keep that in mind when you're running this. But so let's take a look at our outputs. Okay, so if we take a look at our outputs here, this is what we're going to find. First, we're going to find this table right here, which we can go ahead and view. And this will tell us information about what's happening to the reads throughout this entire process. Where are we losing them at which steps? And then define for each sample, right? So for our first sample here, we have 7,793 reads going into our filtering and trimming step, and then only 7,700 or 7,113 coming out. So that's what all the quality filtering was able to do. And then it's able to identify, this is like kind of like a pre-ASV. So for each of the forward and then reverse, it found those unique sequence variants that were cleaned up from any noise, any through denoising, as well as any potential error correction. However, it's not until we merge our forward and reverse where we end up with our real number of ASVs. Um, and then it also identified the number of chimeras and then removed them. And so we see that number decrease yet again. And so what we end up with is 6,436 sequence variants for our first sample, and then so on, right? Okay, great. Right here is we're looking at that post-chimeral removal. And so these in the rows are each of the ASVs. And if we just scroll, so each of these sequences are going to be ASVs. Okay. So they're a little bit long here. And then we're going to have each of our samples in our columns. And then 552, for example, is going to be how many of this ASV was found in this sample. So this is going to be your ASV table. This is one of the main outputs we were hoping for today. And then we will also find our taxonomic table as well. Okay, so this will tell us what ASVs correspond to which taxa. Okay, this is pretty cool. And you'll notice that we don't really get down to that species level, just really that genus, and not even for all of them, mostly family, right? But we're going to use this table and the ASV table and figure out with our metadata what our data really looks like, which samples have an increase in certain microbes, decreasing or increasing. So that ASV table is really where our data lies. And that taxonomic table here is what's going to let us identify which microbes go with which ASV. If you guys would like to save your files, I highly recommend doing so. You can just save them right here because we're going to be using them a little bit later for creating our phyloseq object and the second half of our bioinformatic analysis. Thank you so much for joining. And if you have any questions at all, please let us know. I know this is a little overwhelming. There's a lot of steps here, but as long as we focus on the most important ones, that'll get you all set. Okay, take care and thank you for watching.